We're super happy to present the next talk with Studio Manuel Raeder, which is an interdisciplinary design studio exploring the boundaries between exhibitions, ephemera, books, type design, editing, publishing, textile, and furniture design. Manuel is joining us from Berlin to expand on the studio's deep involvement in editorial and spatial narratives, as well as its interest in the meaning of books within space, the archive, and the future of libraries. Manuel is also the founder of the publishing house BOA TARDE BOA NOITE, which is also the title of his talk here today. A warm welcome, Manuel.
Hello. Hi. How are you feeling? Good. Okay, so I will try and explain a little bit of the whole trajectory of like what happened in my life and how I arrived to what I'm doing now. And so there will be a lot of things mentioned that you might not know the name, so you don't know what it is, or just feel free also to ask me afterwards. And I'm happy if I go a little bit too fast, you can always ask me about the names again, about the artists that I mentioned or the exhibitions I mentioned. But yeah, basically, let's start with the song. No? So my name is Manuel. I was born in 1977. This is the year that this album came out. And basically, my parents always used to have it at home and listen to it. So this musical influence I had already very young. Talking Heads, of course, some of you might know, but they were part of a generation which was post-punk. Yeah, so basically, I'm a designer based in Berlin, and I run a design studio. So maybe at this point where we're fixing this, it's important to mention I wouldn't be here without all the people who work at my studio and support me over the years, which currently is Cecilia Moguia, Ekle Petraskaite, and Elena Malsevs, who runs the publishing house. And the reason why I thought it would be nice to start with the album sleeves of Talking Heads was basically, yeah, because this album was very part of counterculture at the time, and of course the influence of my parents the musical influence had a great impact. And I will talk quite a bit about music in this talk, or you will hear quite a bit of music, because I thought it's also nice if you make connections which are outside of the art world, because I do work a lot in the art field and in the cultural field, where it's very much about the position of what a designer can do in writing history, documenting stories, or basically communicating stories to a certain audience. So when I was at the age of 8, I Run DMC played in the town that I was from, and I asked my parents at the age of 8 if they could take me to the concert. So this was very important for me, because it basically changed my entire life afterwards, and I became very much interested in street culture. And also, of course, in hip-hop and anything related to it.
That was great. And we're going to see some more of Run DMC in a little bit. You know, the guys in the group, Joe, Daryl, and Jay, write all their own rhymes. Before we wrap up today's show, let's hear another rap from Run DMC. This is what they have to say on the subject of books.
Oh yes, indeed, I like to read, cause reading's fun. Not only me, I'm DMC, but also run from the front to the back as pages turn. Reading is the very best way to learn. If you look into a book, you might just say, I had fun, just like DMC and Jay.
So if you look into a book, like Run DMC says, there's fun to find. Especially in the kinds of books we've seen today. Books that have music in their pages. Books that are story songs. Books about dancing. Or books full of rhymes. So find yourself a book that you can get into. Preferably one with a good beat. I'll see you next time.
So yeah, of course, this took me at a very young age to be interested in hip-hop and also street culture. And I started very young being involved in graffiti, which essentially at one point I wasn't interested anymore because I suddenly was interested much more in typography and also letter shapes, which of course was already a direct influence from that. So I'm just showing you here some typefaces that I've designed specifically for projects or for different books specifically over the years. I will not go into detail into any of them, but yeah, of course, this had a huge impact. And as a student, while studying in London, I started to also discover art, basically, and the conceptual artists of the 60s that were very much engaged in using book as a medium in order to convey ideas and to escape out of the white cube in order to be outside of the institution. So the books were serving at the time for the conceptual artist to basically take ideas away from the institution to an audience that is not controlled by the state or by financial institutional support. And this idea as a student, of course, struck me very much, and I got very much into it and started experimenting with these things. Of course, 20 years onwards, I've already worked also with institutions. We've used many of these typefaces also that I designed to create some corporate identities that you see here for museums or galleries. That's what we still do also as a living at my design studio a lot. We take care of some of these institutions and galleries. This is a very recent one we did for the Mexican Pavilion at the Venice Biennial. Yeah, I will not talk about the specific design now because otherwise we will not manage in 45 minutes. But what maybe is important to say at this point, This is the Bauhaus, of course, the Bauhaus ideas and the School of Ulm were very much in touch also at a certain point with Latin America. So Max Bill, Ani Albers, Josef Albers, they spent time in Mexico and Brazil and in Latin America. And there was a quite strong exchange going on. They had ideas, the movement started, concrete poetry, concrete art, neo-concrete art. Will not explain in details, but what you see here is a concrete poem by Augusto de Campos from 1970. It's in Portuguese, amor is love and morte is death. So the concrete poets really try to play with the idea that the reader of the text or the person who's reading the text is participating into the act of reading whilst reading. So you can create your own way of interpreting the text, the way that you interpret an own rhyme, let's say, maybe like in hip-hop. But you can basically read it into different directions and create a different story about something. This is what still interests me today, and is probably one of the main points why I'm still busy in design nowadays, or what you might call design. This idea of basically that you can create a space where things can be interacted and also read and interpreted in different directions and different trajectories. On the left top corner, you see the shape of the state of Sao Paulo, and in the middle, you see the pavement of the city of Sao Paulo in Brazil. Designed by Mirtes dos Santos Pinto in the 60s, she was also very much influenced by concrete poetry and the concrete artists. It's a pavement that's still used in the city of Sao Paulo nowadays. Slowly disappearing because the city doesn't reproduce it anymore, but you see the same shape of the tile. It's a modular shape which you can extend and it keeps on connecting. Very beautiful. I only show it to you because I like it, so I have no particular point about it. But this is also in Sao Paulo. You will find all the non-smoking signs will have this. So the shape of the tile became like an identity of the city, but basically indirectly through those tiles, because they're spread all over the city. Yeah, and then maybe important to mention is, so in 2011, I founded a publishing house already after many years of working with artists on books, where the books mainly are the specific point about a research project, or the book is used as the medium to transform the work outside of the cube, of the white cube or the museum, or where the book is even the exhibition. I found it at one point quite hard to find publishers to distribute certain of these ideas of books because they were not commercially viable or they were not of a commercial interest. So I founded a publishing house called BOA TARDE BOA NOITE, which means good morning, good afternoon, good night, with the idea that these books can become a part of your daily life and your daily experience also as a human being. And we published by now quite a lot of books in collaboration with artists and designed them. Some of them, many are designed by other designers, some of them are designed by the artists themselves, depending on the book. So the publishing house really functions as an independent publishing house with an editorial board where also other people submit publications and we distribute them. So some of you might have already seen some of the books that I've placed on the chairs. So I will not go into explaining you all the books that I've made, but I would just like to explain one in order to understand a little bit of how my method of working or how different methods of working with artists and books can be. All the books you see are designed by my studio that I've spread around. You can browse through them, hand them around, and maybe exchange if you are interested in a particular one. But I would like to briefly talk about this one. It was a collaboration quite a while ago with an artist called Noa Schultz. And we built basically a printing press out of steel rods. And the idea was to make prints that could be very endless and very long, and they would fill the exhibition space. And we could also put objects between the paper and the press. So we made several exhibitions with this where we would occupy a gallery space, a museum space, put the machine, and then for several days print these large prints, cover all the walls and the entire space. And at one point, of course, we were also hoping maybe we sell one. And then, anyway, that never happened. But Noa got contacted by a museum in the end to do a show, which was the Porticus in Frankfurt. And we ended up making a book which documented all this body of work with a printing press. And one of you might have this book in their hands now, actually. I don't know. Would you mind reading the text that I marked in the yellow post-its? You can read English?
Yes.
Yes?
What do you want to read?
Yeah, you can start here, and then each page only has like 1-2 sentences.
Okay. While I'm writing,
Hold it up more, Tim.
while I'm writing this, I look over the prints, trying to decipher words or signs. Do you want me to follow?
Sorry?
Do you want me to follow?
Yeah, until the post-it, until the next post-it.
Okay.
Every page has like 1 sentence.
Suddenly, the prints get lost and form themselves into another installation. It's a whole different happening, and it happens here, but now we are in Berlin. Manuel and me are trying to handle a big, heavy pressure press and an enormous mass of materials in an old apartment that is a gallery too. A long foam worm is creeping over the prints and forming itself into letters. It's writing on the print's signs in its own language. Lakes of paint and islands of foam. And stencils that cut in between are all flattened by the press. But then the worm says, I can read German, so. And that's all.
Thanks. Well, you can hand around the book and have a closer look also. Yeah, so this book was kind of the idea. I took most of the photographs as well. I would do the layout of the pages with the prints and juxtapose them also with exhibition views or performances that Nora did, printed them out. Then she would actually draw on top of them. Then I would rescan them again, and at the very end, when we felt that the pages were good, I would typeset the text that she wrote specifically for the book. So the book, from the beginning until the end, it's basically one story written by Nora explaining the whole project and the different elements it has. Yeah, so this book functions in a way as a document of this body of work, which in that sense doesn't even exist anymore. We still have the printing machine, but most of these prints, they've disappeared, or we've given them to friends, or she even sold some and gave them to galleries. So these works will never be in the same place, in the same moment again. So the book, in that sense, takes the function of documenting this moment, which is like many artist books that I've made, like artists that do ephemeral things, or that do performances, things that are momentarily or based on a time-based moment. So the question then, of course, appears like, how do you deal with that, no? Because traditionally, these catalogs, they always had a picture and a caption, and then you can, of course, break these things. You can do much more fun things, or also play with a narrative and how someone reads those stories. And talking about that, also still when I was a student, around 18, I started discovering the work of Elio Tisica, a Brazilian artist that passed away in the 1990s. But most of his work, some of you might be familiar with it, but a lot of his work has to do with interacting with the sculptures or activating the artworks. So the idea also that the person who looks at the artwork participates into the act of fulfilling the sculpture or even wears the sculpture. So this is a piece of work by him, which is the Parangole. And you see here the dancers of Mangueira in Rio de Janeiro. And the idea was that you could dance with them and you can basically have a two-way interacting with them. Elio's texts and ideas about these things were very important for me and still are nowadays. 20 years later, I got to work also with the estate of Oiticica because Oiticica died quite young of a stroke in 1980. And he made a work which is called Tropicalia, which also gave the name to a musical movement. So by being so obsessed with the work of Elio already quite young, it was by coincidence I spent some time 2008 and 2009 in longer periods in Brazil, and I discovered the work of Rogério Duarte, who I was not familiar with before, but he was very close to Elio Oiticica. And he was actually the one who also not only gave the name Tropicalia with Oiticica to entire movement, but also designed most of these album sleeves and record covers for this movement. So important to explain maybe is Tropicalia, why it is so important to me is of course the time that I've spent with Rogério and his work, but it's also important in the sense that it was really a movement that was just before the dictatorship came into power in 1968 in Brazil. And what most of the musicians were doing is they were basically taking psychedelic rock and rock music from Europe, mixing it with local rhythms, which came, of course, from the carnival and also from Africa, arrived to Brazil. So the Anthropophagic Manifest is very important here. It's the manifest that was written in 1920 by Osvaldo de Andrade. It talks about the absorbing of European culture and what arrives in Latin America. So what these musicians were doing is they were using rock music and make it into a new context, changing it into a tropical context, which had different rhythms, which had the influences from Benin, which had the influences from Angola and the carnival, different colors, different rhythms, and a different aesthetic. And Rogério basically was very much part of creating this aesthetic. So I'll show you some of his albums he made, most of them in the 60s. This is, of course, much before, a long time before computer. Everything was done with collage. Gilberto Gil, Caetano Veloso, Gal Costa, they are the most known artists from this movement. And also what happened was a movement, a cinematic movement just before the dictatorship or during the dictatorship, which one of the leaders was Glauber Rocha, and it basically also Rogério did all his film posters and also acted and wrote some of the music for his film. So this is Joachim Mautner. This was an influence on creating the cover for the book and also the typeface. And one of you might have this book in their hands right now. Who is it? Yes, would you mind reading the text that I marked there? Which is a poem by Rogério Duarte.
Brazil is a patchwork quilt, collection of interrupted patterns. We accept contradictory things raining down on all sides. Our broad space is too narrow to hold so much refuse. Indiscriminate cultural garbage already in a state of decomposition when it arrives. Precarious synthesis of Le Corbusier and Bauhaus. Once dismissed from its social role, architecture rebels in the formalism of Niemeyer, who for his part is still a communist in his spare time. This is to say, when he's away from his drawing board. Vomit from France and Germany shows up here. Modular and Bauhaus models in the same sewage in which their contradictions are erased. Brazilians is sensory, Lemurian, spirit delights in worshipping the brilliant veneer that camouflages a prison wall. The absence of real space has to be filled with garish colors. Catholicism, obscurantist manufacturer of fetishes, is eternalized in the work of the greatest Brazilian artists. Land where emotion is reified in a negation of the essence of art by the formulation of an universal proposal. Portrait of Brazil.
Thanks. So this book was kind of the first thing where we also tried to basically generate the whole project. I started looking for money, trying to find a museum who was interested in Europe to show Rogério Duarte. Of course, no one in Europe knew who Rogério Duarte was. So it took me basically 4 years to convince a museum in Frankfurt, where a friend was a curator, to finally give us the budget to publish the book. And the book was the very first document ever to document his work, spanning from the texts he wrote, the poems he wrote, the design work he did, and also the thinking he did, because he had also a lot of ideas about chess, about grids, about Le Corbusier, which you heard now in the text. These are the sleeves and some pages from the book. And this is the exhibition in the end that we organized in Frankfurt, where we showed most of this material, which we had to find also on flea markets and second-hand shops, because Rogério Duarte escaped during the dictatorship. I mean, most of the artists, his friends, they escaped to Europe, and he was one of the few of this group who stayed in Brazil. So he also got ill, he got a mental illness, he destroyed most of his own work and didn't even have any documentation. So we started looking for this in his family, with friends, and basically, yeah, what we could find on flea markets. And then in 2016, after some years after the show passed, also in Frankfurt, finally we got invited to present this show in the Museum of Modern Art in Rio. And there, of course, it was a grand opening because all the musicians could play live for the opening, which was kind of if the Rolling Stones would play in your opening in a concert, you know. So we couldn't communicate it basically because otherwise there would be thousands of people outside. So it was only musicians in the audience and then also musicians playing. It was a very small audience, but still it was incredible. And sadly, after this also, shortly after this opening, Rogério passed away. And this project was really also related basically to love, and was a project that I did together with the artist Mariana Castillo de Bal, to the love we had for Rogério also, and for his work, and the way he was thinking about things in the world. Okay, let's jump maybe to some other things. This is some of the examples for a fashion label that I've been collaborating with now for more than 20 years. They're called Bless, based in Berlin and in Paris, and my studio has been responsible for all their graphic design. So every collection we make like a new design of how the collection is communicated. And Bless doesn't use in their shows any traditional forms of catwalks. So normally they're in forms of dinners or meetings, or people would dine around a table, press would be invited, and the people eating would wear the clothes. Or here, for example, this was a space in Paris where people would walk through several rooms, and in every room there would be a group welcoming the people who are visiting with a drink. So the graphic design also always has, we've been trying to deal always with the idea, how can you break out of these realms, of these cliches of communication within the fashion world, no? So not using a catwalk, not using top models, using your friends as the models. So how can you also work with that with the image? So at one point we started thinking about the idea of that the lookbooks are what documents each collection, could be published in existing magazines, and we would join with those magazines and use their distribution system in order to escape out of the fashion world. So over the years we made many collaborations with food magazines, with car magazines. But this is a kind of art magazine newspaper that's for free, where we basically then occupied several pages inside, 6 pages, and then stuck these stickers where you can see the new collection. And of course, each lookbook takes another form, because normally we take on their shape or their form or their size or their distribution system in order to also use it in order to reach an audience that is not just hermetically sealed in the normal press offices or people who are interested in bliss. And then, of course, in the shows, we started quite early on, already 15 years ago, to look at what do these images do, like of these shows, like how are they constructed, who takes them. So most of the time we didn't hire a professional photographer. This was before Instagram and hashtags, so we would basically write emails to all the people who were in the audience and ask them to send their images back that they took from the shows. And with these images we designed the lookbooks. And at one point we said, like, we're doing this every 6 months. It would be great to take those images and bring them back into the collection again. So it's like an endless circle of recycling. And that's a point when I started being much more involved also in the label and basically into designing their textiles. So what you see there are some examples where we use the imageries from the shows and then create a textile design. Also, we do all the packaging, basically with the leftover textiles from the collection before. So anything that is not been used, we use it to silkscreen print the bags and packaging system, it's called, in a silkscreen shop in Berlin. Another jump now. This is a project I did in 2019 with my studio. We were invited to Cyprus to work on an exhibition or retrospective exhibition of Christopher Sava. Christopher Sava was a painter from Cyprus that is quite important nowadays again. He lived from 1924 to 1968. And we were designed to do all the graphic design, so the poster, also 3 publications, but also to do all the exhibition architecture. So I've always been very much interested in crafts, of course, and also how materials are used. So next to the museum, I discovered this wood workshop that would have thousands of years old of roots of olive trees, which they wouldn't use, basically. They were lying there for many years already, and they were not using it. So we used some of these also for constructing furniture for the museum and display systems, for example, here for holding postcards or images for the exhibition. The exhibition, we conceived it in 3 levels in the museum. The ground level, sorry? 10 minutes. It will be 15. On the ground level, you could see his oldest works hanging freely in the space. So we made them so that you could see the paintings from both sides and walk around in circle in the museum. On the first floor, you could see all the artists that he worked with in a tavern that he had. And on the 3rd floor, you could see his latest works before he passed away, where we basically created walls that looked like almost like storage walls, but that would diagonally cut the museum in order to break a little bit with the space and also the rhythm of the design of this museum. These are some of his paintings. These are the 3 books we made. One of them is circulating around here. You can have a more close look at that. That book particularly looks at where his paintings were at the point when we worked on the exhibition. So we photographed a lot of the paintings in people's houses or bedrooms or kitchens and took them then afterwards, and they were shown in the show. And this book documents where these paintings ended up or have been many years. Afterwards, the show traveled to Venice biennial in a totally different space, much smaller, so we had to adapt the architecture to the space and find a way also, of course, to make a selection for a smaller amount of works in the space. So we made a running line through the space where all the paintings would be hanged on the same height, but still connected through this piece of shelf. And the line would run through the outdoor spaces where his outdoor sculptures were then. So we started being much more involved over the years in architectural projects and questions about space and how do you deal also with storytelling in the space. And during COVID, we were contacted by Klosterruine. It's an outdoor museum in Berlin, which basically doesn't have a roof. It's a ruin of a former cloister. It's an open space. And I was extremely excited about it because, of course, there's no roof, nothing's protected, everything is outdoor, and they asked, like, can you come up with a display system for our museum that can be extremely light and that we can basically move easily in the evenings when we close it, so it's not stolen at night. So we actually did the opposite. We made things extremely heavy, and everything was designed with half-ton stones, boulders, that would be placed on steel displays so people couldn't move it. So for example, on the left, what you can see, that's the summer program that they have. This is the bookshop. That, of course, they only open when they have an event. That's the roof of the bookshop. That's the roof. We designed also an inflatable roof for when they have lectures and talks going on, because in Berlin you have the problem of rain. It rains quite often. And let's jump to a totally different country now, Buenos Aires, Argentina. So this is the great hit of a band called Virus from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and the lyrics were written by an artist called Eduardo Costa, and we did the design for his retrospective in the Museum Tamayo in Mexico in 2017. His work is very much about these objects. They are made out of layers of acrylic and papier-mâché and manipulate them. And he's a conceptual artist. He was also very close to Elio Tisica. And what we basically did for the exhibition display is we made everything round. So everything was very gentle. There was a lot of flow going through the exhibition space, no hard edges. The works were very gentle, and you could basically experience your body flowing through the space. I will turn off the music, but you can look at it. So this is Ray Barbie, a skateboarder. It's a video by him from 1990 called Propaganda. And it very much relates also to the idea of how body moves through space for me. This is where I come from, and it's also a little bit about how you relate when you are in a space. How does your body dance in a space? How do you move in a space? How do you adjust then also the things that you're reading or the things that you're taking in while the experience in an exhibition or the experience in a city? This is a recent project we did for a new museum that opened in New York called CADA, Center for Artistic Research and Alliances. And the museum, since the very beginning, has been trying to think, or is actively now trying to integrate artists that were underrepresented in New York, so from Latin American community, from African American community. And since the very beginning, since we were approached, I said it would be super interesting if we think also about the furniture and all the display for the museum like that, so that there are no barriers, so that you can break it down into also like sizes and body scales. Now, how do you move with your body on a chair? How do you sit? How do you feel comfortable? So we designed everything in the museum in many different sizes. Well, actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's how it's being put to use now. So you can choose your chair, basically, if you want a small one or a big one, or you can choose your table. And yeah, underneath the tables, we made the logo of Cara, which was actually designed by Rodina, not by us, to support it on the edges of the table and chairs. So they're stuck a little bit like chewing gums underneath the... but mostly, I like these. I can always show them in the talk, but I cannot show them on the website. It's when people actually take the selfies of these things. So, because of course that you see a lot, but on Instagram and social media nowadays. But that really tells the story of how the furniture can then work also in different ways. That was also a project in New York that just recently actually closed in CCS BART. But this worked a little bit the other way around. I wanted to make a chair for my own house, which would be basically an armchair, reclining chair where you could read in it and simply also take it apart by interlocking joints. So no screws, no glues. And at the time I was working on this also with Rodolfo Samperio, who's also part of my studio, working a lot with me on all the furniture and exhibition display. Then we thought, why don't we use the same technique for the exhibition at CCS BART, which was a show about artists' homes and basically artists' furniture and objects created by Ursula Pognoy. And of course, they didn't have so much budget, so we used mainly recycled wood from exhibitions that were installed before there, and we basically cut it out of these leftover pieces. And this is the last project. Belkis Ayon, a Cuban artist that sadly also passed away very young in 1999. She mainly worked with printing techniques and engraving at a time when in Cuba there was no materials available. So she would use anything she could find, like glue, plastic objects, and make these really precise, tiny plates for printing. And what you see here is, of course, the graphic design that we made for the show. And this is a view of the exhibition. But what's really interesting is how her prints, they're amazing. They're so detailed, all glued, each part, piece by hand, and then printed and large scale. So you can see like there are always sections of prints, like 1, 2, 3, 4. This consists of basically 6 prints. So we worked also on the display, was a retrospective of her work in the Ludwig Forum in Aachen in Germany. And we decided to divide the rooms in different colors, and then also we recycled basically old vitrines from the museum, which we just painted in a different color and intervened very minimally in space. Basically also the main question is like, how do you step out as a designer? Or how do you give the space to the artist's work in order for it to be read and to be looked at in its full beauty? And yeah, maybe in relation to the theme of power, I think maybe that's maybe the most interesting thing for me, is like I really enjoy it. I think design can have a lot of power when the designer actually steps out and you give a space for things to happen, be that your body to encounter the content or be that the works to have the space for breathing. At least that's what I try to do. That's it. So.
Thank you so much, Manuel. Anyone has a question? Ryan?
Hey, thank you. This one? Hello?
It has a weird angle. You know?
Okay. I'm curious about the role of the body in space, and particularly your body in the spaces that you're working in. There was that exhibition in Cyprus where it seemed like you kind of had to be in Cyprus in order to make certain decisions in order for
Yes.
the exhibition to be the way it is. Maybe that's the question is how important is it for you to kind of travel to these sites that are not exclusively in Berlin but away from your home to respond to
Yeah.
to come up with the ideas.
So I try to normally specifically avoid these kind of short travels because specifically, of course, nowadays also of always because of the impact it has on the environment. But yeah, when we do a project in a certain place, we try to stay there for quite long. So also the exhibition in Cyprus, at the end, I was there also with parts of my studio for quite a long period. So for the install, like an entire month. And then we work from there. So trying to install, but at the same time also do things on the computer, which are then in other places. Yeah. Or what did you mean? Yeah. So, but yeah, it depends always a little bit on the context. So, for example, New York, also the Cara space. I went there, of course, to see the space before we did the furniture, which was made by A6 architects. They did all the refurbishment of the building. So I actually went to New York to see it before without the furniture. And then Rodolfo and my team, we produced the furniture in Mexico because Rodolfo lives in Mexico. And then I actually never went back to Cara. So I only saw it like 1 year later, because I didn't want to do exactly these travels of short distance. So it's very important and to see and feel how it can function in the space in order to envision it, and then how it could work in relation to the body and the scale, of course, also, no? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting in the end what you said about kind of stepping back as a designer and giving space to the art, because at the same time you also have an approach where your design really participates in the substance matter that you're dealing with rather than simply presenting it. So yeah. For example, with Cara, where you designed the furniture for the space, what was the initial brief? You weren't asked to do that, right? But it kind of it must have expanded out of something else, I assume.
Well, actually, that's why I showed you the video of Ray Barbie before. Because the curator asked me at that point, I really would like to have a playground or a skate park in the museum. And that was basically the idea, like how can you create furniture that can be adjusted in so different ways and formats that kids can also be happy, adults, no matter of, what it's used for. So we try to think about like how can you make for example, use cushions in a museum without them looking to be pretentious. So, for example, when you have cushions in a museum, normally you have the problem that no one wants to sit on cushions because they just look at it as this corner and then no one interacts with it. So the way to do it was like to basically use different scales furnitures, but then also use different scale cushions. So that way then, you know, you could choose your cushion, and also if you want to go in a corner and read a book, it's there available and you can do it. Yeah, at the beginning, of course, that was all like an estimate and like hoping that it will work. And now, like already they're running for a year, and yes, it's working. So, but I didn't know that at the beginning as well.
Another question?
So you spoke in the beginning about sort of rejecting the white cube, right? And I can see like in the exhibition designs that what happens because they have a character and they speak to the artworks, but how do you take those decisions? Are the artists being exhibited involved? Because I guess not always, and what is the process to design those?
So, of course, it's very different if you work with an artist that's not alive anymore. Then you basically work with the curator. So what most of my interest there is, then I have to be into the work and really look into like what the work is about. What was this artist doing? Understand his work, or have a strong interest also in like where this body of work went, or where it is, and where can it go, or what does this body of work maybe mean now, but what does it mean in 20 years or in 30 years? And then that's the point when we can come in as a design studio. We then think about like how to translate that into a format of a book that could be interesting, no? Or how could you think about a work that maybe is pure performance and look at it in the format of a book that it's still enjoyable and not just a document that is very rigid, or that you can maybe also have an experience about it or not. Maybe it's the opposite. So there's no set rule for this. There's no set way of doing it. It has to do very much with listening. So in that sense also, for example, to the museum, the people who work there, the curator. And if it's an artist that is alive, of course, it has to do with listening directly to listening with your ears, what the artist is doing and what he wants, or the person that you collaborate with, basically. Doesn't matter if it's an artist or someone outside of the cultural field. And then, yeah, take yourself out of it and listen what is happening there. And then you can envision like where can you bring it, or where can you find a way to extend it or contradict it or make it more powerful or less powerful, but then to create that space that what the content is about this work, that this can be read in a way that is valuable or interesting, or also important, let's say, to a more greater discourse on culture or counterculture.
Yeah, and this idea of working with books, artist books, in a way where they are either part of the work or even are the work itself. You said that you're inspired by movements of conceptual art from 50s and 60s. Personally, I've been also very inspired by Cés Siegelau and his ideas of exhibition as book and book as exhibition. And I also know that Fluxus movement has been active in these ideas. Are these also some of your references, or do you have other people that you're looking to?
So some of the references, obviously, you saw, particularly on Fluxus. I was thinking a long time about presenting one book here today also, which is called Bosch's Press, that I worked on many years, which was a publishing house by a dear friend, Marta Elion and Felipe Ehrenberg. And they're very close to me, and they were part of Fluxus. So they published Fluxschuh, and many of the independent publications were made by them through this publishing house called Bosch's Press. And yeah, it's very important for me, and it's some, yeah, I don't even know where to start, so I would have to explain also the whole project now. But yeah, it's very, I'm very conscious about it, and I do like it a lot. And maybe just to mention, if you talk about this, like going out of the white cube and going into other fields, of course I can extend this conversation here much more, because a lot of the printing history, of course, has to do with religion, and it has to do with how the word of God in different religions is spread, the Bible, the Torah, etc., etc. You know, so a lot of these things come from that history. But the question for me is more like, how can you break with this? So it is not this Catholic experience going to a white cube where the holy art object is presented. No? So a lot of the things, a lot of the work that I do that has been dealing with that, like how can you break that? How can you also break the way of how a text is read and give it different interpretations that, yeah. I'll stop here.
Thank you. That conversation can perhaps continue later on. We have time for one or two more questions.
So, my question is like, a South American designer living in Berlin and having your studio in Berlin. Your aesthetic really like looks very South American.
I'm German.
Can you hear?
Yeah.
How do you manage to kind of stay truthful to that aesthetic under the pressure of like global aesthetics or even Berliner aesthetic? Is that something that is a process that you make consciously, like I want to decolonize that, or it comes naturally by your reference?
So maybe that's where the first confusion starts. Yes, I'm German. I'm from Berlin. So my aesthetic, obviously breaks many boundaries, as you just confirmed yourself. But yeah, that's basically also what I hope to. So yeah.
And how come you have such a strong relationship with Brazil?
With Brazil and Mexico in particular, yes, because my partner is from Mexico City, and I have also spent a lot of time in Brazil through these projects. But you also saw other examples: Argentina, Buenos Aires, Cuba, and Cyprus. So, but anyway, it's more about the work, I would say, no? About Brazil, particularly what drew me there to spend longer periods of time and interest also is what I showed you. It's Elio Tisica and Rogério Duarte. They are really the root of that, and Rogério was a close friend. So he was the one who made me go back to Salvador de Bahia for longer periods also and spend time there with him.
Unfortunately, we'll have to cut questions here so that everyone has proper time to eat lunch. We'll have 45 minutes break, so we'll be back at 2:15 for the next talk. So have a nice break. Thank you, Manuel.